The loneliest people usually live in the biggest apartments. Marcus Reed heard that once from an old mechanic in Baltimore when he was 19 years old and too stubborn to understand what the man meant. 20 years later, standing barefoot in a tiny Brooklyn kitchen at 5:12 in the morning flipping pancakes, while rain tapped softly against the apartment windows, he finally did. The apartment smelled like butter and cinnamon. Warm. Familiar. Safe. Ava sat cross-legged on the counter wearing oversized pink pajamas with little astronauts printed on them, carefully drawing planets in a notebook, while half a pancake disappeared from her plate one bite at a time. Jupiter looks angry, Marcus said without looking up from the skillet. Ava frowned at the page. That's because Jupiter has storms bigger than Texas. Marcus nodded once like that made perfect sense. Fair point. The kitchen light buzzed softly overhead. Old apartment. Old wiring. He'd meant to fix it last month. But there was always something else first. Rent. Groceries. Ava's school shoes after she outgrew the last pair in 4 months, because apparently 8-year-olds could grow overnight just to humble their parents. Marcus plated the last pancake and slid it onto her plate. Ava looked up immediately. That one's bigger. That's because you're interrogating planets before sunrise. Scientists do that. Scientists also sleep. She smiled around another bite. Marcus finally leaned against the counter with his coffee mug in both hands. Quiet settled over the apartment again. Comfortable quiet. The kind that didn't need filling. Outside, Brooklyn moved slowly through another gray November morning. Car tires hissed against wet pavement 6 stories below. Somewhere in the building, pipes knocked softly inside the walls. Normal sounds. Real sounds. Marcus liked real things. Real coffee. Real conversations. Real people. The world had enough polished nonsense already. Ava looked toward him suddenly. You forgot your lunch again yesterday. Marcus sighed. You're 8. Why are you tracking my lunch schedule? Because you came home hungry and ate cereal at 10 p.m. He pointed his fork at her slowly. You noticed too much. That's because you taught me to. Marcus looked down into his coffee for a second after that. Small moments like this still caught him off guard sometimes. The strange weight of hearing your own lessons come back at you from a smaller voice. Ava hopped off the counter and carried her plate to the sink. Too small for the motion to look graceful. Too determined to care. Marcus watched her quietly while steam curled upward from the faucet. Some mornings still surprised him. Not because life got easier. It didn't. But because peace had a way of arriving quietly when nobody was looking for it. 3 years ago, after the divorce, Marcus thought silence would destroy him. The apartment back then had felt empty in all the wrong ways. Too still. Too cold. Every room echoing with things unsaid. But Ava changed that without trying. Kids did that. They turned routines into anchors. Pancakes on Tuesdays. Laundry after dinner. Cartoons every Saturday morning unless homework got ignored first. Tiny rituals. Tiny salvations. Ava dried her hands on a dish towel and glanced toward the window. It's gonna rain harder later. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Meteorologist now. Mrs. Patterson said my generation has climate anxiety. Your generation also leaves socks everywhere. Ava grinned. That's unrelated. Marcus shook his head slowly, but the corner of his mouth lifted anyway. Then his phone buzzed across the counter. One text. Building maintenance emergency. Penthouse level. Marcus exhaled quietly and reached for his jacket hanging over the chair. Ava watched him carefully now. She always noticed the small pauses. You'll be home for dinner? Marcus grabbed his keys. Always. But for some reason, standing there in the warm kitchen with rain darkening the windows behind him, the promise felt heavier than usual. Like something was already moving toward them through the city. Something neither of them could see yet. By 8:40 that morning, Manhattan already looked exhausted. Rainwater streaked down glass skyscrapers in long silver lines while black SUVs crawled bumper to bumper through midtown traffic like oversized shadows. Marcus Reed stood inside the freight elevator of Sterling Tower, holding a maintenance tablet in one hand and a paper coffee cup in the other, while fluorescent lights flickered overhead every few seconds. 38 floors up, billion-dollar decisions were probably already happening before most people finished breakfast. Marcus mostly cared whether the leaking pipe on 27 had finally been repaired correctly this time. The elevator dinged softly at the penthouse level. Quiet hit first. Expensive buildings always sounded different at the top. Thicker carpet. Softer footsteps. Air conditioning so perfectly balanced it almost felt artificial. Marcus stepped out into the hallway and immediately noticed the assistant standing outside the double glass doors with her phone pressed tightly against her ear. Young, blonde, stressed. The kind of stress that came from trying not to panic in expensive shoes. I understand the board is angry, Mr. Whitmore, she whispered quickly. But she has not stopped working in 36 hours. Pause. Her jaw tightened. No, sir. I am not exaggerating. Marcus slowed his steps automatically. Not to eavesdrop. Just habit. You learned to read rooms when you worked maintenance long enough. The assistant noticed him then and lowered the phone immediately. Maintenance. Marcus lifted the tablet slightly. Electrical issue on this floor. She exhaled once like she had forgotten how breathing worked. Right? Yeah. The conference room lights keep shorting out. Marcus nodded and stepped past her quietly. The penthouse conference room looked like nobody inside had slept in days. Empty espresso cups covered the long marble table beside stacks of contracts and glowing laptops. Wall monitors flashed stock numbers in red. Somebody had written projected losses across the glass board in black marker, so aggressively the pen strokes looked angry. Marcus crouched near the floor outlet beside the wall and opened the electrical panel without saying much. He preferred it that way. Invisible work. Quiet work. But voices carried easily through glass. We cannot delay the acquisition again. Male voice. Sharp. Impatient. Another voice answered immediately. Calm. Female. Controlled in the dangerous kind of way. Then maybe your legal department should have read the contract before wasting my morning. Marcus glanced up without meaning to. Victoria Sterling stood near the far window overlooking Manhattan in a fitted white blouse tucked into dark trousers, one hand wrapped around a tablet, while the other pressed lightly against the edge of the conference table. Television cameras always made powerful people look larger somehow. In person, she looked tired. Not physically weak. Just worn thin around the edges. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back too tightly. Her posture perfect in the way people stood when they refused to let themselves fall apart in public. One executive near the table cleared his throat carefully. Victoria, maybe we should pause for an hour. No, the answer came instantly. Too instantly. Silence followed. Marcus returned to the electrical panel, but something about the room fell off now. Not the tension. Rich people always carried tension around like expensive luggage. It was the stillness afterward, the kind that comes right before somebody hits their limit. Marcus tightened the final wire connection and stood slowly. Across the room, Victoria reached for her coffee cup without looking. Her hand missed slightly. Tiny movement. Barely noticeable. But Marcus noticed. The cup tipped sideways. Dark coffee spilled across contracts and straight onto the polished marble floor. Nobody moved for half a second. Then everybody moved at once. Assistants rushed forward. Voices overlapped. Victoria stared down at the mess like she no longer recognized what she was looking at. Marcus grabbed a towel from his cart automatically and stepped forward before anyone else reached her. Careful, he said quietly. Floor's slick. Victoria looked up then, directly at him for the first time. Her blue eyes looked sharp enough to cut through glass. But underneath that sharpness sat something else entirely. Exhaustion. Real exhaustion. The kind sleep could not fix. And for one strange second, standing in the middle of a billion-dollar penthouse conference room while rain darkened the city outside, Victoria Sterling looked less like the most powerful woman in Manhattan and more like someone trying very hard not to disappear. The first sign something was wrong came 3 hours later when the lights flickered across the entire 42nd floor at exactly 2:17 in the afternoon. Marcus was halfway through replacing a damaged breaker panel in the east maintenance room when every overhead light blinked twice in rapid succession. Then once more. The building hummed strangely afterward. Low. Uneven. Marcus straightened slowly and listened. Old buildings talked if you paid attention long enough. Sterling Tower was not old, but even new buildings had tells. He grabbed his radio from the cart. Control, you seeing these fluctuations? Static crackled for a second. Then a tired voice answered. Transformer issue downtown. Utility company says rolling outages possible through tonight. Marcus glanced toward the narrow maintenance window facing the city. Rain hammered harder now, turning Manhattan gray and blurry beneath heavy clouds. Copy that, he said quietly. He checked the panel one more time before heading back toward the elevator. Halfway down the hall, he noticed movement near the executive offices. Fast footsteps. Raised voices. Two assistants rushed past carrying laptops and stacks of folders, while somebody farther inside argued loudly about investors threatening to pull out before market close. Marcus kept walking. None of his business. That was another thing life taught him eventually. Rich people panicked differently than everyone else. Poor people worried about losing homes. Rich people worried about losing percentages. But when the elevator doors opened near the underground garage 20 minutes later, he saw something that made him stop. Victoria Sterling stood alone beside a black SUV with one hand pressed against the concrete pillar behind her. No assistants now. No executives. No sharp voice cutting through meetings. Just silence and fluorescent garage lights reflecting against wet cement. Marcus noticed two things immediately. First, she looked pale. Second, she was still trying to answer emails on her phone anyway. He walked slower this time, careful not to crowd her. "You okay?" Victoria barely looked up. "Fine." Same answer people always gave right before collapsing. Marcus had heard it from his ex-wife during the last year of their marriage. Heard it from exhausted coworkers working double shifts. Heard it from himself in bathroom mirrors at midnight after Ava finally fell asleep. Fine usually meant surviving badly. Victoria pushed away from the pillar too quickly. The movement wobbled slightly. Her phone slipped from her hand and hit the garage floor with a sharp crack. Marcus caught her arm before she lost balance completely. Warm skin, cold fingers. Victoria inhaled sharply and grabbed his forearm automatically to steady herself. For half a second, neither of them moved. Marcus noticed how light she felt under his hand. Lighter than someone carrying an empire around all day should feel. Victoria closed her eyes once. Briefly. "I just need coffee." "You need food." Her eyes opened immediately at that. Defensive now. "Excuse me." Marcus released her arm slowly and bent to pick up the phone instead. Cracked screen. Still buzzing nonstop with incoming calls. "You are shaking," he said calmly. "And I watched you drink espresso for 6 straight hours without touching actual food." Victoria stared at him like nobody had spoken honestly to her in a very long time. Most people around powerful women learn to perform, to flatter, to soften everything. Marcus did not seem interested in any of that. Somewhere above them, the garage lights flickered again. Then suddenly half the underground level dropped into darkness. A few people cursed nearby. Car alarms chirped once before dying quiet again. Victoria looked upward automatically. Perfect. Marcus checked his watch. This storm is getting worse. I have a driver waiting. But even as she said it, her phone lit up with a message across the cracked screen. Driver canceled. Flooding uptown. Victoria laughed softly after reading it. Not amused. Just tired enough that frustration stopped sounding sharp. Marcus noticed the laugh did not match the woman from the boardroom. This one sounded smaller somehow. Human. Another overhead light flickered violently before shutting off completely. Rain. Thundered outside the garage entrance now. Marcus looked toward the street, then back at Victoria standing alone beside a useless luxury SUV in 4-inch heels while Manhattan slowly lost power around them. "You got somewhere safe to go tonight?" he asked quietly. Victoria looked at him for a long second before answering. Honestly, she glanced toward the dark garage exit. "I'm not sure anymore." By 6 o'clock that evening, Manhattan looked like somebody had unplugged half the city. Traffic lights blinked uselessly through heavy rain, while emergency generators hummed from dark office towers across Midtown. Marcus Reed drove carefully through flooded streets with both hands steady on the steering wheel, while windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the storm. Victoria Sterling sat beside him in silence. Her phone rested face down in her lap now. Dead battery. Dead signal. Maybe both. Marcus did not ask. The heater inside the truck pushed warm air through old vents that clicked every few seconds. Victoria stared out the passenger window at soaked sidewalks and glowing storefront reflections sliding past in streaks of red and gold. "This thing sounds like it survived a war," she said quietly after a while. Marcus glanced at the dashboard once. It survived New York potholes. Same difference. The corner of her mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. Silence settled again afterward. Comfortable on his side. Unfamiliar on hers. Marcus noticed she kept checking her wristwatch even though there was nowhere left to be tonight. People addicted to pressure usually did that. They mistook stillness for failure. 20 minutes later, Marcus pulled into a narrow Brooklyn street lined with brick apartment buildings and overflowing rain gutters. Small restaurants glowed softly through fogged windows, while somebody farther down the block dragged trash bins through puddles beneath an umbrella. Real neighborhood. Loud pipes. Tiny kitchens. Rent too high anyway. Victoria looked out the windshield carefully. You live here? Usually. He parked beside the curb and killed the engine. Rain hammered the roof immediately without the truck moving beneath it. Anymore. Victoria hesitated before reaching for the door handle. Marcus noticed. You can still change your mind. She looked toward him then. Her blonde hair had loosened slightly during the drive, soft strands falling near her cheek now instead of the perfectly controlled style from earlier. And go where? Marcus did not answer because they both already knew the truth. The city outside looked cold tonight. His apartment did not. They ran through rain together beneath one umbrella Marcus found in the back seat after digging past jumper cables and Ava's Forgotten Science Project poster board. Victoria held her heels in one hand while trying not to slip on wet concrete. Marcus stayed half a step beside her without touching her arm unless she lost balance. Small thing. Careful thing. She noticed anyway. Apartment 6B smelled faintly like laundry detergent and garlic bread the second Marcus unlocked the door. Warm yellow lights spilled into the hallway. Somewhere inside, animated television voices echoed softly. Then small footsteps hit hardwood floors at full speed. Dad. Ava appeared around the corner wearing mismatched socks and an oversized sweatshirt almost hanging off one shoulder. She stopped immediately after spotting Victoria standing in the doorway beside him. Big gray-blue, eyes lifted upward slowly. Curious. Observant. Too smart sometimes. Marcus set the umbrella aside carefully. Power still on? Ava nodded once. Mrs. Patterson said the building generator kicked in after lunch. Then she looked directly at Victoria again. Hi. Victoria looked caught off guard for the first time all day. Hi. Ava tilted her head slightly. You are taller than the magazines. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Ava. What? It is true. Victoria blinked once. Then unexpectedly laughed. Soft. Real. Not the polished boardroom laugh from interviews. This one sounded rusty from lack of use. Ava seemed satisfied with herself afterward and wandered back toward the living room, carrying a bowl of popcorn almost too large for her arms. Marcus stepped aside to let Victoria enter fully. She moved slowly through the apartment after that. Not judgmental, just quiet. Her eyes drifted over tiny details without meaning to. Family photos taped slightly crooked beside the refrigerator. Ava's colored pencils spread across the coffee table. A worn gray couch with a folded blanket over one side. The place was small. Maybe 800 square feet if somebody measured generously. But nothing inside it felt cold. Victoria stopped near the kitchen counter while rain rattled softly against the windows. This is nice, she said finally. Marcus hung his jacket near the door. It is not much. Victoria looked around one more time before answering. No, her voice softened slightly. It is exactly enough. Marcus cooked because it gave his hands something useful to do while life happened around him. 20 minutes after Victoria stepped into the apartment, the kitchen smelled like garlic, butter, and tomato sauce simmering quietly in a scratched pan on the stove. Rain still tapped against the windows, softer now, steady enough to blur the city lights outside into streaks of gold and white. Ava sat cross-legged at the kitchen counter coloring another page in her astronomy notebook, while occasionally stealing pieces of shredded cheese directly from the cutting board whenever she thought Marcus was not looking. You know I can see you, right? Marcus asked without turning around. Ava immediately pointed toward Victoria. She took some too. Victoria looked genuinely startled. I did not. Ava smiled slowly. You thought about it. Marcus shook his head once, hiding a small smile behind the steam rising from the skillet. Victoria stood near the counter quietly watching them. Earlier that day, she had been surrounded by executives in $1,000 suits arguing over acquisitions and collapsing stock projections. Now she stood barefoot in borrowed apartment slippers while an 8-year-old accused her of stealing mozzarella cheese. The strange part was not how absurd it felt. The strange part was how quickly her shoulders started relaxing inside it. Marcus handed Ava a plate first. Always Ava first. Victoria noticed that immediately. Kids noticed it too. Ava took the pasta carefully before scooting over on the stool. You can sit there. Victoria blinked once. Where? Next to me. The billionaire hesitated for half a second before sitting down slowly beside her. Marcus placed the second plate in front of Victoria afterward. Simple food. Nothing expensive. Just pasta, garlic bread, and enough warmth in the room to make the storm outside feel farther away than it really was. Victoria looked down at the plate for a moment. You made this from scratch? Marcus shrugged once while pouring water into glasses. Mostly. Ava leaned toward Victoria confidentially. That means yes. Victoria laughed softly again. That sound was becoming more natural now. Less guarded. Marcus noticed without staring. He noticed most things. Dinner unfolded quietly after that. Easy conversation. Small jokes. Ava talking about school projects and how her teacher once confused Saturn with Jupiter during science class. Victoria listened more than she spoke at first, but eventually the apartment pulled her into its rhythm anyway. Wait, she said suddenly while looking at Ava's notebook. You know all the moons of Jupiter? Ava lifted one shoulder proudly. Most of them. Most adults do not know that. Ava twirled spaghetti around her fork carefully. Most adults are weird. Marcus nearly choked on his water this time. Victoria covered her smile with one hand. She is not wrong, Marcus admitted quietly. The rain outside deepened again for a few minutes, drumming against the windows while warm kitchen light reflected softly off the marble-colored countertop. Victoria found herself watching Marcus without meaning to. The way he moved around the kitchen calmly. The way he listened fully when Ava spoke. The way he cleaned dishes while cooking at the same time because years of routine had made every movement automatic. Nothing about him looked rushed. Nothing looked performed. That unsettled her more than arrogance ever could. Powerful men usually needed rooms to orbit around them. Marcus Reed seemed perfectly comfortable standing still. Ava eventually wandered toward the couch, carrying her science notebook and blanket, while cartoons flickered softly across the television screen. Marcus stayed behind in the kitchen rinsing dishes beneath warm water. Victoria remained seated at the counter longer than necessary, one hand wrapped loosely around a coffee mug she had not touched yet. You are quiet now, Marcus said finally without looking up. Victoria stared at the steam rising from her cup. I think I forgot people could live like this. Marcus dried a plate carefully before answering. Like what? Victoria glanced toward Ava half asleep on the couch beneath a blanket too big for her small frame. Then toward the tiny apartment glowing softly against the storm outside. Her voice lowered slightly. Like they actually want to come home at night. Marcus stopped drying the plate for 1 second. Just one. Then continued again, quietly, while rain slid down the windows behind them both. By 10:30 that night, the storm had settled into the kind of rain that felt permanent. Slow. Heavy. Endless against the windows. Ava had fallen asleep sideways on the couch sometime during the second animated movie, one sock halfway off her foot, while her science notebook rested open across her stomach. Marcus lowered the television volume before draping a blanket more carefully around her shoulders. Victoria watched from the kitchen island in silence. Something about the movement caught her off guard. The ease of it. The instinct. Marcus did not move like someone performing fatherhood. He moved like someone who had rebuilt his entire life around it. She always falls asleep before the ending, he said quietly. Victoria looked toward the couch. She was trying very hard not to. Marcus smiled slightly while dimming the living room lamp. That is genetic stubbornness. Victoria wrapped both hands around the warm mug in front of her. Tea this time. Marcus had noticed she stopped touching coffee after 8 at night. Another detail he never mentioned out loud. The apartment felt smaller now in the best possible way. Warm kitchen light spilled softly across dark countertops while rain painted moving shadows against the walls. Somewhere in the building, pipes knocked faintly behind old drywall. Victoria sat there listening to ordinary sounds she had spent years forgetting existed. Marcus opened a cabinet above the stove and pulled out folded towels. Bathroom is down the hall if you want a shower. Victoria blinked once like the thought had not even occurred to her yet. You keep emergency towels for random billionaires. Mostly for Ava when she decides puddles are a personality trait. Victoria laughed under her breath again. Softer now. Easier. Marcus handed her one of his clean shirts a second later. Dark gray. Oversized on her, even folded in half. Your clothes are still drying. Victoria stared at the shirt for a moment before taking it carefully. Thank you. Marcus nodded once and stepped back automatically, giving her space without needing asked. Another careful thing. Another thing she noticed. 20 minutes later, Victoria stood alone in the apartment bathroom, staring at herself through slightly fogged mirror glass, while warm water dripped slowly from the ends of her damp hair. She barely recognized the woman looking back. No blazer. No jewelry except the thin gold chain still resting against her collarbone. No perfect makeup. Just tired blue eyes and Marcus Reed's oversized gray shirt hanging loosely against bare legs above borrowed apartment socks. The shirt smelled faintly like laundry detergent and cedar soap. Clean. Warm. Real. Victoria leaned both hands against the sink quietly. She had spent years surrounded by luxury and somehow forgotten comfort entirely. When she finally stepped back into the hallway, the apartment lights had dimmed lower. Marcus stood alone in the kitchen rinsing the last coffee mug beneath warm water while rain blurred the city beyond the windows behind him. He glanced up once when she entered. Just once. But Victoria noticed the pause anyway. Tiny. Controlled. Human. The gray shirt hung lower off one shoulder than she realized. She adjusted it instinctively. Marcus looked back down at the sink immediately after. There are extra blankets in the hall closet, he said calmly. Victoria moved toward the kitchen slower than necessary. Bare feet soft against hardwood floors. You really do not ask questions, do you? Marcus dried the mug quietly before answering. Depends on the question. Victoria leaned lightly against the counter across from him. Most people spend the first 10 minutes around me trying to impress me. Marcus folded the dish towel once. Sounds exhausting. She let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. You have no idea. Silence settled again afterward. Not awkward. Just close. The kind that made small movements louder somehow. Rain against windows. Water dripping softly from the faucet. Marcus finally looked at her directly again, and something in Victoria's chest tightened unexpectedly. Because there was no calculation in his expression. No performance. No hunger for access or status. Just calm attention. Dangerous in its own way. Victoria looked away first this time. Toward the living room. Toward Ava sleeping safely beneath blankets only a few feet away. Then quietly, almost to herself, she said, I do not think anyone has waited for me to come home in a very long time. Marcus did not answer immediately. That made it worse somehow. When he finally spoke, his voice stayed low and steady beneath the sound of rain. People are not supposed to do life alone, Victoria. And for the first time all day, hearing her first name spoken softly instead of strategically almost broke something inside her. The apartment grew quieter after midnight. Rain softened outside until it sounded less like weather and more like breathing against the windows. Ava slept deeply on the couch now, one hand hanging loosely off the blanket while cartoons flickered silently across the muted television screen. Marcus finally turned the television off completely, and the room settled into warm darkness lit mostly by the kitchen light above the stove. Victoria remained near the counter, fingers wrapped loosely around the mug that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. She should have been tired enough to sleep. Instead, she felt strangely awake, too aware of everything. The smell of clean laundry drifting faintly from the dryer down the hall. The low hum of the refrigerator. Marcus standing only a few feet away drying dishes slower now because neither of them seemed ready for the night to end yet. You missed a spot, Victoria said quietly after a while. Marcus glanced down at the plate in his hand. That is tragic. Very serious situation. He looked at her then. Fully this time. The kind of look that lasted half a second too long to stay harmless. Victoria felt heat rise unexpectedly beneath the collar of the oversized gray shirt hanging loosely against her shoulder. She looked down first. Dangerous. That was the word her brain kept reaching for tonight. Not because Marcus Reed did anything reckless. The opposite. He was careful, steady, calm in ways that made her feel unsteady by comparison. Marcus set the last plate onto the drying rack and finally leaned against the opposite counter. Arms crossed loosely. Kitchen light caught the faint silver at the edge of an old scar near his wrist before his sleeve shifted over it again. Victoria noticed that too. You always this quiet? She asked softly. Marcus shrugged once. Depends who I am around. And me? He considered the question for a second instead of answering immediately. You look like somebody who never gets silence unless something went wrong. Victoria let out a small breath through her nose. That obvious? Only to people paying attention. Rain slid slowly down the windows behind him. Somewhere down the hall, pipes knocked softly inside the walls again. Victoria stared at him for a long moment without speaking, then finally said the thing she had not admitted out loud in years. I do not really know how to stop anymore. Marcus stayed still. Stop what? She looked down into the untouched tea. Working, performing, solving problems before they exist. Her voice lowered slightly afterward. If I stop moving too long, people start leaving. Silence followed. Not empty silence. Heavy silence. Marcus understood more than she expected him to. That was becoming a problem. Victoria looked up again and found him already watching her quietly. No judgment. No pity. Somehow worse. Who taught you that? He asked finally. Victoria almost laughed at the question because it sounded so simple. Like loneliness could be traced back neatly to one moment. Probably everyone. Marcus pushed away from the counter slowly then. Not closer exactly. Just enough movement to change the air between them. Victoria felt it immediately. That is not how Ava sees you, he said calmly. Victoria blinked once. Ava has known me for 4 hours. Kids know when somebody is safe. The words landed harder than they should have. Victoria swallowed carefully. Marcus stood close enough now that she could smell cedar soap and coffee lingering faintly against his shirt. Close enough that the apartment suddenly felt smaller. Warmer. She looked at his mouth before she meant to. Just 1 second. But Marcus noticed. Of course he noticed. Neither of them moved afterward. That was the dangerous part. The stillness. The awareness. Victoria's breathing slowed slightly as she tilted her head upward without realizing it. Marcus looked down at her now with that same impossible calm that kept pulling her closer instead of pushing her away. Outside, thunder rolled softly through the city. Inside the kitchen, the distance between them disappeared inch by inch until Victoria could feel warmth radiating from him through the thin fabric of the oversized gray shirt. Her fingers tightened unconsciously around the edge of the counter behind her. Marcus lowered his voice almost to a whisper. Victoria. Hearing her name like that nearly undid her. She stepped closer before logic caught up. Slow. Careful. Her eyes dropped once more toward his mouth, while rain traced silver lines down the dark windows behind them both. And Marcus did not step away. Victoria did not realize she was holding her breath until the hallway light turned on behind them. Soft yellow light spilled across the apartment floor. Dad. Ava's sleepy voice cut gently through the silence like somebody opening a window inside a room that had gotten too warm. Victoria stepped back immediately, fast enough that the edge of the counter bumped lightly against her hip. Marcus turned toward the hallway at the same moment, his expression shifting instantly from something quieter into something familiar again. Steady. Protective. Ava stood there half asleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit against her chest, curls messy from sleep, while the oversized blanket trailed behind her like a small cape. Her eyes moved slowly between them. Marcus near the sink. Victoria standing too. Close to him in an oversized gray shirt that definitely did not belong to her. The kitchen suddenly felt very small. You okay, baby? Marcus asked softly. Ava nodded once, but kept staring at Victoria. Not suspicious. Just thoughtful in the strange, serious way children sometimes became at midnight. I got thirsty. Marcus reached automatically for a glass from the cabinet. Water or juice? Water. Victoria tucked loose damp hair behind her ear quietly while trying to slow her heartbeat back down to something normal. Her face still felt warm. She hated that Marcus probably noticed. Worse, she hated that he did not seem smug about it at all. Marcus handed Ava the glass carefully. Ava drank half of it immediately before lowering the cup again. Then she looked directly at Victoria. Are you staying tomorrow too? Silence. Complete silence. Even the rain outside seemed softer suddenly. Victoria blinked once. The question should not have mattered. A child asking an innocent question in the middle of the night. Simple. Harmless. But something about the way Ava asked it landed deep inside her chest before she could protect herself from it. Because nobody asked powerful people to stay. People asked for meetings. Signatures. Access. Investments. Favors. Nobody looked disappointed at the thought of them leaving. Marcus watched Victoria carefully now without interrupting. Ava yawned against the stuffed rabbit. You laughed more tonight than on television. Victoria let out a quiet breath that almost sounded unsteady. You watch interviews? Ava nodded proudly. Dad says smart women are cool. Marcus looked mildly horrified immediately afterward. That sounds less embarrassing in context. Ava ignored him completely. You looked sad on TV. Victoria's throat tightened unexpectedly. Children should not have been able to see things that clearly. But they always did. Ava stepped farther into the kitchen, blanket dragging softly behind her. You do not look sad here. Marcus lowered his eyes briefly toward the counter like he suddenly understood exactly why Victoria looked shaken. Victoria stared down at the little girl standing in front of her, holding a rabbit with one ear. Bent sideways from years of love. Warm apartment. Rain outside. Midnight silence. Something inside her shifted painfully. Small but irreversible. She crouched slightly so she could meet Ava at eye level. I should probably leave tomorrow, she said softly. Ava frowned immediately. Genuine disappointment crossed her face before she could hide it. Oh, just one word. Quiet. But it hit harder than boardrooms full of angry investors ever had. Victoria looked away for half a second because somehow that tiny reaction hurt. Marcus stepped closer then, not touching either of them. Just there. Solid. Calm. Ava leaned sleepily against his side without thinking. Victoria watched the movement carefully. Natural trust. Effortless closeness. Family. Her chest tightened again before she could stop it. Ava rubbed one eye slowly. Can you still come back sometime? Marcus looked down toward his daughter. Ava. What? I am asking politely. Victoria laughed softly then. But this time the sound cracked slightly in the middle. Ava immediately noticed. Are you crying? Victoria touched beneath one eye too quickly. No, Marcus looked at her quietly. Too quietly. The apartment stayed still around them afterward, while rain traced silver patterns down the dark kitchen windows. And for the first time in years, Victoria Sterling found herself terrified by something much smaller than losing money. She was terrified of wanting to belong somewhere she could not control. Morning arrived quietly. The storm had passed sometime before sunrise, leaving thin silver light stretched across Brooklyn rooftops and rainwater dripping steadily from fire escapes outside the apartment windows. Marcus woke first out of habit. 6 years of fatherhood trained his body better than alarm clocks ever could. He moved carefully through the apartment in sweatpants and a faded black t-shirt, trying not to wake Ava sleeping sideways across the couch with her stuffed rabbit trapped beneath one arm. The apartment still smelled faintly like rain and coffee from the night before. Marcus started the coffee maker softly before opening the refrigerator. Eggs. Half a carton of milk. Strawberries Ava forgot about 3 days ago. Enough. He was reaching for the skillet when he noticed movement near the hallway. Victoria stood there quietly, barefoot again, one hand lightly resting against the doorframe, while the oversized gray shirt slipped softly against her shoulder in the pale morning light. Her hair was loose now, slightly messy from sleep. Human in a way cameras would never understand. Marcus looked at her for 1 second before turning back toward the stove. You sleep at all? Victoria stepped farther into the kitchen slowly. A little. Her voice sounded softer in the morning, less guarded somehow. Marcus nodded once and handed her a mug without asking how she took her coffee. Black. No sugar. She noticed that immediately. You remember things. Marcus cracked eggs carefully into the pan. Usually. Victoria wrapped both hands around the mug while warm steam drifted upward between them. The apartment felt different in daylight. Smaller maybe, but somehow warmer too. Sunlight touched Ava's science drawings taped crookedly beside the refrigerator. Tiny fingerprints still visible in dried marker streaks. Victoria stared at them longer than necessary. She drew all these? Marcus glanced over briefly. Every available surface eventually. Victoria smiled into the coffee mug before the expression faded again. Reality returning slowly now. Phones. Meetings. Investors. Drivers. Security teams. Her real life waiting across the river. Marcus must have felt the shift because he lowered the stove heat quietly and asked, Your building got power back around for this morning. Victoria looked toward him immediately. How do you know? Maintenance group chat. Another small thing. Another reminder that his world and hers touched differently than either of them expected. Ava stirred suddenly beneath the blanket before sitting up halfway, with sleepy confusion written across her face. Then she spotted Victoria standing in the kitchen and smiled instantly. Not surprised anymore. Just happy. You stayed. The words hit Victoria harder than they should have this early in the morning. Marcus set a plate onto the counter while Ava shuffled toward them, dragging her blanket behind her. Brush. Teeth first, Marcus said automatically. Ava groaned dramatically, but obeyed anyway. Victoria watched her disappear down the hallway before speaking quietly. She makes it sound important. Marcus looked down at the skillet instead of directly at her. To her it is. Silence settled gently between them after that. Sunlight climbed slowly higher across the kitchen floor, while coffee brewed and eggs crackled softly in the pan. Victoria suddenly realized she had not checked her phone in over an hour. The thought should have made her anxious. Instead, it scared her for a completely different reason. Marcus plated breakfast calmly while she stood there trying to understand why this apartment already felt harder to leave than her penthouse ever had. Ava returned a minute later and climbed onto the stool beside Victoria automatically like the seat already belonged to her. "Dad makes better pancakes than restaurants," she announced proudly. Marcus pointed a spatula toward her without looking up. "Do not oversell me before 8 in the morning." Victoria laughed softly. Real laugh again. Easy now. Dangerous because it was easy. Her phone finally buzzed from the kitchen counter where it had spent the night charging. 12 missed calls. 4 urgent emails. 2 board meeting reminders. Her real life waiting impatiently for her return. Victoria stared at the screen without touching it, then slowly locked the phone again face down against the counter. Marcus noticed. Of course he noticed. But he said nothing. That silence almost undid her more than words could have. Because for the first time in years, Victoria Sterling realized the thing she feared most was not losing control of her company. It was walking out that apartment door and feeling cold again.